He was a voice, ethereal and untamed, capable of breaking hearts with a single, soaring note. Yet beneath the incandescent beauty of his sound lay a profound and almost childlike vulnerability, an unspoken longing for belonging. Jeff Buckley existed in the liminal space between dream and reality, a wandering spirit who found his truest home only within the intricate architecture of his music. He gave the world an exquisite glimpse into his soul, a gift of raw, unfiltered emotion, but the cost of such profound openness, for a spirit so sensitive, was a burden too heavy to bear alone. Jeffrey Scott Buckley entered the world on November 17, 1966, in Orange, California, a child born into the echoes of a musical legacy he barely knew. His mother, Mary Gibbert, was a talented cellist and pianist, a free spirit who instilled in him a deep love for art and music. His biological father was the enigmatic folk singer Tim Buckley, a man whose shadow loomed large in Jeff's life despite their near-total estrangement. Tim Buckley left when Jeff was an infant, and they only met a handful of times, fleeting encounters that left more questions than answers. This paternal absence was a profound wellspring of longing and unanswered questions that would subtly infuse Jeff's art, a haunting melody of what might have been. Growing up in Orange County, Jeff's childhood was nomadic, marked by frequent moves between various towns, a restlessness that would become a constant companion. He found solace in his mother's records, losing himself in the diverse sounds of jazz, blues, rock, and folk. Music wasn't just background noise, it was a sanctuary, a language, a way to process the fragmented world around him. He learned guitar early, his small fingers instinctively finding chords, his young voice beginning to mimic the inflections of the greats he adored. He was a shy, thoughtful child, often retreated into his own rich inner world. The lack of a stable home, the constant shifting, instilled in him a deep desire for connection, a yearning to find his place, even as his inherent independence pulled him towards solitary creative pursuits. He wrestled with feelings of abandonment, a quiet ache that shaped his sensitive disposition. Music, then, became his anchor, the one constant in a life defined by flux. It was in these early solitary moments, strumming a guitar in a quiet room, that the extraordinary voice began to emerge, first as a whisper, then as a soaring testament to the depths of emotion he carried within him. It was a voice that seemed to contain multitudes, the pain of a son, the wonder of a dreamer, the boundless curiosity of an artist. The road to being heard, for Jeff Buckley, was less a frantic chase and more a gradual, almost accidental unfolding, punctuated by moments of intense, quiet struggle. After graduating from high school, he spent time at the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles, immersing himself in the technical aspects of guitar, but the formal academic setting felt restrictive to his wild, intuitive spirit. He drifted, playing in various obscure bands, experimenting with different genres, always searching for a sound, a band, a context that truly resonated with the complex symphony inside him. He moved to New York City in the early 1990s, drawn by the raw energy of the East Village music scene. These were the days of grinding obscurity, playing open mic nights in smoky, dimly lit clubs, often for a handful of people, sometimes for no one at all. He worked odd jobs, struggling to make ends meet, the harsh realities of artistic poverty, a constant companion. Rejection was a familiar sting, polite dismissals from booking agents, disinterested ears from industry scouts. But it was in the intimate, sacred space of the Sin A Cafe, a tiny Irish coffeehouse in the East Village, that something truly began to shift. Here, armed with only his voice and an electric guitar, Jeff began to build a legend. He played for hours, weaving intricate tapestries of original songs and audacious, reimagined covers that defied genre. He didn't just sing, he sculpted sound, his voice a liquid instrument capable of breathtaking acrobatics, from a hushed whisper to an operatic wail. The silence in the room as he performed was profound, a reverent hush broken only by his soaring voice. People weren't just listening. They were transfixed, feeling the raw, exposed emotion that poured from him. Word spread like wildfire. A hushed secret passed from mouth to ear. You have to see this guy. Record labels, initially skeptical of his unconventional approach and lack of a definitive genre, started to take notice. They heard the whispers, felt the burgeoning cult following. The turning point wasn't a single audition or a grand performance, but a slow, organic accumulation of awe. Lenny Kaye of the Patti Smith Group famously described his voice as a pure conduit. The emotional toll of this period was subtle but deep. He poured his entire being into every performance, leaving himself utterly vulnerable on stage, and the quiet return to solitude after these intense communal experiences could be jarring. He was fiercely independent, almost pathologically so, and the idea of being packaged, marketed, or controlled by the industry filled him with a quiet dread. When he finally signed with Columbia Records in 1992, it felt less like a triumph and more like a cautious step into the unknown. He had finally been heard, but the price of that breakthrough was the impending invasion of his carefully guarded inner world. A beautiful vulnerability, now exposed to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the global spotlight. The spotlight years for Jeff Buckley were a brief, incandescent flicker, a period of meteoric rise that brought both immense adoration and a profound, disorienting sense of displacement. His debut album, Grace, released in 1994, was not an instant commercial blockbuster, but it was an undeniable masterpiece, a slow-burning phenomenon that garnered fervent critical acclaim and built a devoted following word of mouth. Songs like Last Goodbye, Mojo Pin, and his iconic, haunting rendition of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah showcased a voice of unparalleled range and emotional depth, a voice that seemed to channel centuries of human longing and despair. He wasn't just singing, he was performing an exorcism, laying bare his soul with every note. Suddenly, the quiet reverence of Cine was replaced by sold-out clubs across the globe, then larger theaters, and the whispers turned into a roar. He was touring relentlessly, a whirlwind of flights, sound checks, and performances. The chaos backstage was a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of his music. Handlers, interviewers, sound engineers, a constant stream of demands on his energy and time. He was often exhausted, overwhelmed by the relentless pace, the sudden, jarring shift from obscurity to being recognized on the street. The emotional high of applause was immense, a powerful validation for an artist who poured every fiber of his being into his craft. He thrived on the connection with his audience, the shared moment of transcendence. But the quiet loneliness afterward, in sterile hotel rooms in anonymous cities, was a heavy counterpoint. He was a shy, deeply private man thrust into the unforgiving glare of public life, and the dissonance between the celebrated persona and his true self was immense. He often felt a profound disconnect, a sense that the world saw a version of him that wasn't quite real, a beautiful projection rather than the complex, vulnerable man. Interviews revealed his thoughtful, sometimes rambling nature, his discomfort with simplistic labels, his genuine artistry. Magazine covers depicted him as a rock icon, but he resisted the title, seeing himself primarily as a musician, a perpetual student of sound. He grappled with the commercial expectations of a major label, fiercely protective of his artistic integrity, determined not to compromise his vision for wider appeal. He had a profound love for music beyond his own, often performing spontaneous covers of obscure songs, sharing his vast musical vocabulary with anyone who would listen. His relationships, particularly his on-again, off-again romance with Joan Wasser, Joan as policewoman, reflected the nomadic, intense nature of his life. He longed for stability and deep connection, but the demands of his career, and perhaps his own restless spirit, often made it elusive. The public glory was undeniable, the critical adoration widespread, but the private cost was steep, a constant battle to maintain his identity, his sanity, and his authenticity in a world determined to define him by his fame. He was living the dream, but it was a dream that often felt like a beautiful golden cage, with his soul longing for a way out. Beneath the shimmering veil of critical acclaim and growing public adoration, Jeff Buckley's internal world was a landscape of profound sensitivity, often bordering on an exquisite fragility. His meteoric rise, rather than offering solace, often amplified his existing struggles. He was never a person who fit neatly into boxes, and the sudden, overwhelming pressure to be a marketable rock star deeply unsettled him. He yearned for genuine connection, yet the adoration of millions often felt impersonal, a love directed at the projection, not the vulnerable man. His perfectionism was both a driving force and a debilitating burden. He agonized over every note, every lyric, every performance, constantly pushing himself to impossible standards. This intense self-scrutiny contributed to a pervasive sense of inadequacy, a quiet belief that he was never quite good enough, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. He wrestled with depression, a shadow that had likely followed him since childhood, intensified by the relentless touring and the isolation that often accompanies fame. Unlike some of his contemporaries, his struggle was not primarily with substance addiction in the conventional, destructive sense that consumed many others. While he certainly experimented with drugs, it was never the defining addiction that overshadowed his life. His true vice, perhaps, was his boundless emotional openness, his refusal to build a protective shell around his incredibly sensitive nature. He felt everything intensely, the beauty of a melody, the sorrow of a lost love, the weight of expectation. This emotional hypersensitivity, while fueling his extraordinary artistry, also left him profoundly vulnerable to the harsh realities of the world. Interviews often captured his poetic, sometimes meandering thought process, his deep intellectual curiosity, but also a palpable shyness, a discomfort with the spotlight he had inadvertently attracted. He struggled with insomnia, his mind racing, unable to find rest from the constant flow of ideas and anxieties. He was a wanderer at heart, physically and emotionally, often embarking on spontaneous drives or walks, seeking a quiet space to process the overwhelming sensory input of his life. His artistic integrity was paramount, almost a sacred vow. He resisted any attempt to compromise his vision, famously clashing with record executives over creative direction. This unwavering commitment to his art was admirable, but it also placed immense pressure on him, knowing that every choice, every note, carried the weight of his soul. He was an old soul in a young man's body, carrying a wisdom and melancholy that felt beyond his years. The quiet loneliness that often settled after his electrifying performances was a testament to the chasm between the worshipped performer and the deeply human, profoundly sensitive individual who just wanted to find a place to belong. The turning point for Jeff Buckley wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse on stage or a public breakdown, but a series of quiet, almost imperceptible shifts that signaled his growing disillusionment with the machinery of fame and his relentless pursuit of artistic evolution. After the relentless touring cycle for Grace ended, Jeff retreated from the public eye. This wasn't a calculated break for fame, but a genuine need for space, for quiet, for a chance to reconnect with the pure joy of making music without the pressures of expectation. He moved to Memphis, Tennessee in 1996, drawn by its rich musical history and its relative anonymity compared to New York or Los Angeles. This was a deliberate choice to shed the rock star image and immerse himself in a different creative environment, to find new sounds, new inspirations. He started playing unannounced, impromptu gigs in small local clubs under various pseudonyms, sometimes even using the name of his beloved cat, the Professor. These were intimate, raw performances, a return to the purity of the cine days, where he could experiment freely, shed the weight of expectation, and simply play for the love of it. He was working on his second album, a highly anticipated follow-up to Grace, tentatively titled My Sweetheart the Drunk. He poured himself into these new recordings, exploring darker, more experimental sounds, pushing his boundaries as an artist. This period was marked by intense creative ferment, but also by a deep-seated frustration with the slow pace of the recording process and his own struggles to articulate the complex sonic landscapes in his mind. He was trying to escape the shadow of Grace, to to prove he was more than just hallelujah or last goodbye. He was reshaping his sense of self, moving away from the beautiful, tragic figure narrative that the media had imposed upon him, striving to be simply a musician, a working artist, someone who could disappear into the creative process without the suffocating weight of celebrity. The quiet decision to move to Memphis, to embrace a simpler, more anonymous existence, was a profound turning point. It was an attempt to regain control, to find peace in anonymity, and to ground himself in the fundamental act of creation, away from the roaring currents of fame that had threatened to drown him. He was searching for a new beginning, a quieter truth in the heart of the American South. Jeff Buckley's life after fame was tragically brief, a poignant glimpse into a soul trying to find solid ground before it was snatched away. In Memphis, he wasn't reinventing himself as a different kind of celebrity. He was simply trying to be a person, a working musician, free from the suffocating expectations that had come with grace. He adopted a quieter rhythm, renting a small house, frequenting local hangouts, and even working shifts at a local pet store. This was his attempt at normalcy, at a life unburdened by the relentless demands of the music industry machine. He found solace in the simple routines, in the anonymity that Memphis generously offered. He continued to play those intimate, spontaneous club gigs, often arriving unannounced, setting up his gear and playing for hours, losing himself in the music for music's sake. These were moments of pure joy, a return to the unvarnished authenticity that had first captivated audiences at Cine. He was a voracious listener, constantly absorbing new sounds, broadening his musical palette. He'd spend hours in record stores, exploring, learning. His conversations with friends often revolved around music, philosophy, and the profound questions of existence. He was still incredibly sensitive, still prone to periods of introspection and melancholy, but there was a palpable sense of seeking, of reaching for something more grounded. He was working diligently on his new album, pouring his raw emotion into songs that were darker, more experimental, reflecting the complexities of his inner landscape. He grappled with the pressure of the sophomore album, the need to surpass the brilliance of Grace, but he also found a renewed sense of purpose in the creative process itself. This was his healing, his way of coping with the silence after the applause, by filling it with new sounds, new ideas, new connections to the universal human experience. He was attempting to build a life where his art could flourish without destroying him, where the beauty he created could exist without costing him his soul. He was, in his own way, finally finding a fragile kind of peace, a quiet rhythm in a world that had once demanded only explosive brilliance. Jeff Buckley's voice still echoes today, a haunting, ethereal presence that transcends time and genre. What he gave the world was an extraordinary, unvarnished glimpse into the human soul, a raw tapestry of beauty and sorrow woven with impossible vocal acrobatics and deeply resonant lyrics. He taught us that vulnerability is strength, that true artistry lies in unflinching honesty, and that music can be a spiritual experience, a conduit to the divine. He left behind a single perfect studio album, Grace, a testament to his singular genius and a legacy that continues to inspire countless musicians and artists. But what the world took from him, perhaps, was the very sanctuary he sought, the quiet space he needed to simply be. It took the profound sensitivity that made his art so powerful and exposed it to a relentless glare, leaving him perpetually adrift between the tangible and the ethereal. His tragic, accidental drowning on May 29, 1997, at the age of 30, was a devastating, premature end to a life that promised so much more. He slipped into the Wolf River Harbor in Memphis, a spontaneous, late-night swim that turned into a final, silent goodbye. His guitar, still on the shore, was a poignant witness to his final moment. And in the profound silence that followed, a silence deeper than any he had ever known, we are left with the lingering sound of his voice, a timeless whisper carried on the wind, forever calling from the deep, forever reminding us of the beautiful, fragile soul who passed too soon, leaving behind an unfinished symphony that continues to resonate in the hearts of those who truly listen.